He reported that most of the men he met there did not want just the light sex, but wanted what he called, quote, heavy sex, end quote. He stated that once the person was asleep, he did not feel quite so rushed or pressured with the person. He reported that he would fix a drink in which he would put approximately 5 sleeping pills, and this would keep the person asleep for approximately 8 hours. He stated he would stay with the person, staying awake for about 3/4 of the time, and then he would sleep with the person. Usually, he would masturbate 3 times during that period. He reported that he never injured anyone and never recalled attempting to strangle any of these men that he stayed with at the bathhouse. He stated that once he was in the room, he would have some conversation with the person, mix them a drink, and kiss them. The person would then get groggy, and the person would then fall asleep. He indicated that he would only experience an erection about 10% of the time when the person was in an awakened state. He reported that once the person fell asleep, he had complete control and could do what he wanted at his leisure. He did not have to entertain the person, and he felt that he could leave the room if he wanted to. He indicated that he had drugged 10 or 15 people before the management learned what he was doing. Subsequently, his membership was revoked. He then started using a local hotel room, and he stated that at this point, the bathhouse had been a much more controlled environment.
Now, he's telling you that when they're in an awakened state, he can only do something 10% of the time.
He could only get an erection 10% of the time.
Did you ask him about the other times when they were asleep?
Yeah, when they were asleep, he was able to get erections, and I think it's somewhere here in my notes, it was either 90 or 100% of the time.
This has got to be done. Who are these people that died? You didn't see their relatives come in and testify because there was a guilty plea. You didn't hear the facts in great detail. I don't want you to forget it. I don't want you to forget who they are. Sometimes, and this is when I'm in my work, naturally I see people getting very concerned about a defendant, what's happened to a defendant. And because the victim is gone and dead, the victim isn't there to say, hey, what about me? What about me? Don't forget Stephen Twomey, who died in the Ambassador Hotel with the defendant.
He encountered Mr. Twomey while he was waiting at a bus stop. He had already obtained his hotel room at the Ambassador, which he believes is located on 24th in Wisconsin. He'd gotten the room earlier with the plan that if he had encountered someone, he would take them there for the purpose of having sex with them. He had already purchased some sleeping pills, which he had at the room for the purpose of rendering anyone he brought back there helpless so he could have sex with them. He spoke with Twomey and asked him if he wanted to spend the night with him at the hotel room. Twomey agreed. Dahmer does not recall if he offered him money to come to the room or not. Upon arrival at the hotel, both Dahmer and Twomey got undressed and laid on the bed. At that time, they had what Mr. Dahmer called light sex. He described this as hugging, kissing, and mutual masturbation. After about an hour or two, Mr. Dahmer made a drink for Mr. Twomey, at which he put the sleeping pills. Mr. Twomey drank this, fell asleep, and Mr. Dahmer kept drinking and eventually fell asleep himself. Mr. Dahmer related that when he woke up, he was lying on top of Mr. Twomey, and Dahmer's forearms were visibly bruised. He saw that Mr. Twomey was obviously dead. He was bleeding from the head, and his chest was crushed in, and some of the bones were broken.
He reports blacking out and waking up in the morning. Stephen was in bed on his back. Jeffrey recalls being on top of him. He reported that Stephen's head was over the side of the bed and there was a bruise on his chest. He stated that he, Jeffrey, had a bruise on his arm. Jeffrey was shocked when he saw that Stephen was dead. He stated that he had no intention of murdering him. Seeing Stephen dead brought back memories of 1978 and his first victim, Stephen Hicks. He stated that he had paced the floor, felt horrified, shocked, and frightened, and could not believe this had happened. He then put the body in a closet and went to a mall. He bought a suitcase and subsequently put the victim inside of the suitcase. He then rented the room for another night. At 1 a.m. he checked out and took a taxi to his grandmother's house. He kept the body in the fruit cellar for approximately 9 days. One day, while his grandmother was at church, he laid the body out and, according to Mr. Dahmer, quote, slit open the belly and masturbated.
The experience led him to make two changes. The first was, having realized how difficult it was to move a corpse from a hotel room, he decided not to return to hotels anymore, and from that point began to take men back to his grandmother's house, where he would have greater privacy and more space to work. The other thing he told me was that this changed his efforts to control himself. In his words, quote, after that incident, it seemed like there was no point in trying to resist the urges and the compulsion to do that. So that's when I started going out, looking around at the bars for other people. I asked, what do you mean there was no point? And he said, just since it had happened again, much to my surprise, it just, I don't know, it's hard to describe, just seemed by that time the driving compulsion to be with someone and control them was so strong and so prevalent throughout all my waking hours that I just continued doing that. It seemed like that broke any thought of holding back and not doing that sort of thing again.
Don't forget Richard James Dockstader on that board. James Dockstader, age 15, picked up by the defendant, age 15.
He had been at a bar on a Saturday night. He was standing in front of a bus stop and saw an attractive male. He assumed that this male had been drinking and asked him if he wanted to spend the night for $50. The victim agreed and took a bus to his home. When they sat, that's the grandmother's home. They sat in the living room while his grandmother was asleep. They laid together, kissed, and engaged in oral sex. The male said that he had to be back by morning, and Jeffrey did not want him to leave, so he fixed him a drink. When the victim fell asleep, he strangled him. After he was dead, Jeffrey laid with him for a while and then had anal sex. He placed the body in the fruit cellar and put a blanket over him. The next morning, he ate breakfast with his grandmother, and she went off to church. He kept the third victim's body for 1 week. During this period of time, he would lay with him and masturbate. At the end of the week, he laid the body out and, according to Jeffrey, quote, defleshed it, end quote.
Don't forget Richard Guerrero, who died at the defendant's hands.
First, he administered a drugged drink to his victim, and then after his victim was unconscious from the effects of that, he strangled him, which again indicates that it was not an impulsive act, but rather that he'd taken steps to prepare for the killing and, as it were, to anesthetize his victim before he killed him.
He then took the body to the basement, defleshed it, put it in a trash bag, and saved the skull. He kept the skull for several months and brought it to his 24th Street apartment when he moved there. He reported that the police never found the skull. He left his grandmother's home because he wanted to live on his own and because once his grandmother had commented on his bringing a young man to her home. This made him feel uncomfortable, and he made up a story about why the young man was there.
The next intended victim got away and was able to testify against Jeffrey Dahmer. But he couldn't be seen on camera as he was underage at the time. However, we can hear his voice and his name.
My name is Ronald Douglas Flowers, Jr.
Approximately what time did you get to the Club 219 that evening?
Not real sure. I know it was late because the parking lot was pretty filled at the time, so I imagine it was 11:30 around that time.
Okay. And did you meet your friends there?
Yes, I did.
After the bar closed, what next occurred?
They all left, and I went back to my car and tried to start it.
And when you tried to start your car, what happened?
Well, I had been having a problem with my choke, so I imagine that was what the problem was, and it wouldn't start. And after I kept trying it and kept trying it, the battery just died.
Pardon me. What did you do next?